we can enter segment 2. We can talk a little bit about conscious business practices. Right now, we are reporting from the quarantine cam, and we're talking about what's happening with the industry. Cannabis tourism was really on the rise, and it's going to kind of come like this again, but from down here because everything is stopped.
Everything took like 2 steps back, right?
We're on lockdown here in Los Angeles. I'm not sure what's going on in the rest of the country. I tried to look it up, but I couldn't figure it out. But we're on lockdown here. So all the events are closed, and we don't even know when they're going to pick up again. It could be in the summer months when things get a little hotter and the virus is a little bit inhibited. But we're not quite sure. And cannabis tourism is really wonderful. You can go and visit different farms, you can visit different dispensaries, different setups. So maybe, Victor, you can talk to us a little bit about Emerald Farm Tour specifically and what your farm tour is like. And then if you would share, your perspectives on how you all integrate conscious business practices.
Yeah, totally. So, having had my start in advocacy 20 years ago, I'm really well rooted in this idea that cannabis should be for everyone, and access should be a very easy thing. And I'm of the mindset that there should be no barriers to access.
And it should be safe.
Yeah, safety, of course, harm reduction all the way. But ultimately, when I started this company, it was out of a necessity, but also out of an advantage. I started because I saw Dave presented this idea to me. Hey, you do this well. You do this. You have the connections, and this is like kind of who you are. So present it to the public. And so that's kind of what I did. A lot of the tours that I have created, a lot of the experiences that I have created, are really rooted in kind of who I am and my experiences through the industry. So. To talk about conscious cannabis is to talk, at least in my space, is to talk about all the good that I've put out in my career and how this has all come back around to reward me, I guess, in allowing me to create a business that allows me to continue to do what I've been doing for my career in a way that is, rising all the tides, right? Rising all the boats through rising the tide. So
Rise together.
This was the idea. When we created this business model, it was never a business model that was like predatory in any way. Our whole thing was like, okay, the customer pays us, we pay the facilities, and there's an opportunity for brands to get involved and pay us to continue to pay the facilities and create a great experience. So the model is very how do I put this, kind to those who are part of the process. So we're not, what we're doing here is we're opening the door basically for people and providing access to experiences and education that right now in the world, we have nothing like this, right? I mean, United States of America is leading the charge in legal cannabis. We're doing things in ways that are, I think, more conscious than other countries, surprisingly enough, for, welcome to America, right?
But if you were to share with our audience what that looks like, what is it like to go on one of your tours?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like, it's important to see that, part of being a conscious cannabis company, especially right now, is understanding harm reduction. And what that means specifically, that has a lot of meanings for me, not just reducing the harms in consuming cannabis and not getting yourself sick with coronavirus or whatever, but ultimately like understanding why cannabis is here, why we do things the way we do here in California, and how this method benefits our society here in California, makes us happier people, makes us a more grounded society, and makes us more in line with reality and truth and justice and all the things that cannabis legalization has realized for us as a society.
Okay, I just want to jump in here real quick because I had this kind of thought yesterday about the Controlled Substance Act. When the Controlled Substance Act came in, just prior to that, there was a lot going on in terms of the Vietnam War, and the flow of cannabis was cut off from Mexico.
Right.
And following that, subsequently, there was a number of protests. And I just wonder if potentially the cutoff of the supply of cannabis actually was an impetus for people to rise up and take a little bit more action than they potentially would have if they were consuming cannabis.
Well, that's amazing. I think that's great that you mentioned that, because that is actually an integral part of our tour in San Francisco. We actually talk about this. You know, the paraquat scare of I want to say it was the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, was another impetus that drew people to wanting cannabis to be grown domestically. I mean, right now we grow all of the cannabis for the world here in the Emerald Triangle.
Yeah, 80%.
Yeah, and so it wasn't before the early 70s. We were receiving it all from abroad, and so the impetus to grow our own the back to the land movement, if you will, was the beginning of this. But we left the city of San Francisco and we went north because the weed that was coming over from overseas was sprayed with paraquat by our own federal government. And so we were getting sick. And so that's not what we were about. We were about clean, safe cannabis from the very beginning. So the impetus to grow our own really comes from this need, the flow had stopped, or the flow was not safe. So, yeah.
And now we'll be producing our own toilet paper. We just learned that lesson again. Globalization again.
I mean, like, you know, it's one of those, you know, the self-sufficiency of the cannabis industry or the cannabis movement prior to it being codified as an industry, the self-sufficiency and the sheer demand drove everyone to kind of create this industry. So again, you know, the cannabis plant drove us to do this, right? It wasn't, you know, we live for this cannabis plant. It doesn't live for us, right? You know,
symbiosis.
Yeah.
So tell us about what it's like to go on your tour.
So the tours are great. I mean, you see this bubbly, exciting personality. You get this all the way through for 3 hours. But generally speaking, the tours are a few different products. We do a San Francisco city tour,
great,
which is 3 hours in a limo, and you're going to see city sights. You're going to go to parts of the city that most average tourists don't get to see. You're going to see some of my favorite spots that are relevant to cannabis. You're going to hear some awesome stories.
Do you want to share like one with us? One of your
I like telling the story about, so we're in the 150th anniversary of Golden Gate Park this year, which is funny enough because we were supposed to do like a big 420 thing in the park concurrently with the 150th of Golden Gate Park. So in honor of that, I always talk about kind of some stories that are relevant to the park history, that are kind of demonstrative of how amazing San Francisco society can really be. And one of those stories are about this man named John. What's his name? John McEwen. He was a Scotsman who lived in the park, and he planted over 1 million trees. He was part of the
it's beautiful there.
So he like lived in the park. It was his job to plant these trees, and he staunchly believed that the park should be, for San Francisco, for everyone in the city, should be as natural looking and as much like nature as possible. So he detested the idea of statues in the park, and any statue in the park. He spent the end times of his life, the last few years of his life, he spent planting trees around the facades of every single statue that the city placed. And then in true San Francisco fashion, the day the man died, they gave him a statue of his own. And so it just goes to speak to, kind of the, just the weird, San Francisco being kind of the quirky place that it is. It's really represented in stories like that.
There's some interesting subcultures in San Francisco for sure.
Yeah. So we tell a lot of interesting stories. It's all rooted in information that we've researched and We put together a lot of curriculum for our tours, and it's all cited. And then of course the other thing too is we love telling the story of 420 and the Waldos. That's people have no idea when they get on our bus that San Rafael High School had such an interesting. You
want to share it with us? I know a little bit, but I'd like to hear it from your mouth.
I mean, the stories are really well documented every year around 420 in the Chronicle and stuff. But just generally speaking, these guys in the 60s, friends in San Rafael High School, they called themselves the Waldos. They held up the wall at every party, kind of thing. And they loved to smoke their weed. And one day they had a cousin or something come back from the Coast Guard. And the cousin had planted a victory garden in the Marin Headlands. And he got spooked and was like, yo, you guys go find this victory garden. I'm not going to go looking for this victory garden. They're going to bust me, whatever. These kids would meet up every day at 420, which was the time San Rafael High School got out at the time. And they'd meet by the statue of Louis Pasteur, which was, I believe, a physics teacher at San Rafael High School. There's a statue out front of the school. They'd meet there at 420 and go out to look for the victory garden. Well, the victory garden was never found, but through the cultural vector of the Grateful Dead and that lot scene, 420 became ingrained in our cultural history.
Amazing. Thank you
yeah,
for
it's a fun story. More of this when you take our tour.
Can't wait.